Okay, so we are on. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on when you are watching this. So as you know, I've been doing an interview series, speaking with parents, carers, or adults that work with or that care for children that have either experienced complex trauma or that have certain special needs. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to bring language to the experiences that children are having when they do yoga and meditation, and because I think it's really important for us to understand what those experiences are, and quite often children are unable to bring that language to the experience. So today I have John Ogilvie joining me, which is an absolute privilege. So if any of you are a lover of yoga, everything yoga, you might have already heard of John. So John is the founder of the Byron Yoga Centre and is known throughout Australia for his work and expertise. So I really thank you, John, for joining me today. How are you going?
Very well, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, and I do feel honoured to be with you.
Thank you, thank you. So John, why don't you, I guess, introduce yourself to everybody that might not have heard of you before.
It's okay. So I've been doing yoga for about 35, 40 years. I started my yoga career down in Melbourne, and I've been living now in Byron Bay for about the last 32 years. And I founded the Byron Yoga Centre. We just had our 30th anniversary, our 30th birthday.
Yeah.
It's been quite a long time. And I specialise in training people to be yoga teachers. And the other thing that we do a lot of is run yoga retreats. Yeah, so that's kind of me. I've practiced most styles of yoga, and the style of yoga that I focus on these days is known as Purna yoga, where we're trying to make, the word Purna means integrated or complete. So we're trying to really integrate the aspects of the postures, the asanas, the pranayama, the meditation, and the philosophy to try and get a full experience of what yoga can be.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And for you, it's been a very long journey. So, many years within this field. And what I suppose for you, there was a lot of experiences in your childhood that led you to finding yoga. Can you share with everybody, what occurred for you in your teens and the challenges that you were faced with?
I can still remember even before my teens, I had this, always had this feeling that I was different, that I was the odd one out, found it difficult to fit in with groups. I always felt like I was the last one to be picked for sporting teams and all this type of thing. And so as I moved into my teens, I can see now that I really had a lot of trouble coping with life on life's terms. And so I tended to opt out. And it wasn't long before I found drugs and alcohol were a way of escaping from those uncomfortable feelings that I was having. Yeah.
Sure. And when you say uncomfortable feelings, John, what did that mean for you? I mean, looking back on it now, was it within your body that you can remember, or was it because we know now that it's all connected, right? So what did that mean for you?
Well, there was a lot of emotional discomfort, and it did translate to not feeling good in my body and about my body. I felt that I've had a lot of feelings of inadequacy. So, mentally I was okay. I did very well scholastically, but I didn't feel that I could communicate very well with my peers, with my friends, and I didn't feel that I was able to compete very well with sports, even though I actually did do all right. But it was always that discomfort in my body, a lack of, well, I can see now, a lack of connection to my body.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. And so you turned to drugs and alcohol. And what was the impact for your life when you did that?
So it was a way, drugs and alcohol was this way of numbing those uncomfortable feelings, those physical, mental, emotional, uncomfortable feelings that I was going through. And, you know, in a way that kind of worked at the time. And I was drawn towards, you might say, like-minded people. I was drawn towards groups that were also into spending their recreational time getting intoxicated as opposed to doing, you know, more positive activities.
Mm-hmm.
And that it seemed like a big party for a long time, but it wasn't long before, towards my mid to late teens, that it started to have negative effects on my health.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to develop addictions to certain drugs. So by the time I reached my 20s, I was a very active heroin addict,
Okay.
which that heroin addiction was a solid 10-year period for me.
Yeah, wow. Okay. And so that would have affected everything, your relationships, your any work that you were doing, that would have impacted everything, right?
Absolutely. There wasn't anything that I was able to really stick at
Yeah.
and find success with anything. It was a very roller coaster ride.
Sure, sure. And so what was the turning point for you?
So I was what they sometimes refer to as a binge user. So I would stop using and go through some type of recovery program, and then I would stay abstinent for a period of time, start to get my kind of like my life back together, and I would, during those periods of abstinence, I would do a lot of sport, but solo sport like swimming, going to the gym, doing aerobics, and try to really get my health back together and try to feel good about myself. But it wouldn't be long before the feelings of discomfort returned, and then I would start using and very quickly start binge using again.
Okay, sure. So it was just a cycle, vicious, vicious cycle. And
Yes.
we do see that a lot with addiction, don't we? Once those uncomfortable feelings come back, you know, and the children that I work with, they experience the same thing. So they might, they seek to feel something different. So they go and choose really dangerous behaviours because they just want to escape from the really unsafe, uncomfortable feelings within their bodies. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
And
So,
also the feeling of isolation as well, that we want to feel that we belong to something. So for me, it was feeling like I belonged to the drug culture or the drug subculture, even though it was very negative, I could identify as being part of something.
yeah, absolutely. Because at the end, I mean, we're desperate for connection as human beings. So I completely understand that. And so, what led you to find yoga, John? Because you have explained and I have read that this seems to be the world of healing for you and what's helped you with this challenge. So how did that all come about for you?
So in my 20s, when I was trying to grab on to something to try and save my life or to turn my life around, I was trying so many different things. But it was when I was in uh, a very short-term drug detox centre that one of the staff had a practice that he called yoga. That was my very first introduction to it. It wasn't actually part of the program. And he said in the morning, it was a residential program, he said, in the morning, I'm going to do a yoga practice. Would you like to join me? Which I did do. And I just took to it like a fish to water. It was just fabulous. There was very, very little yoga around in Australia back in those days in Melbourne. And I didn't know there was even such a thing as yoga classes. He gave me some A4 printouts of stick drawings, and I tried as best I could after I left that detox centre to do my own practice with these stick drawings.
Mm-hmm.
It was my start of doing yoga, yeah, way back in the late 70s.
Yeah, okay, okay. And what, I guess, you know, that we only stick to things when we feel differently within our bodies, right? So when did you
Yeah.
start to feel different and what did that mean to you that's led to, you know, you founding the Byron Yoga Centre, and obviously it's a huge passion of yours now. So when did those feelings change, and what do you think caused that?
So once I started doing yoga, it really just felt right. It felt good in my body. I started to feel more connected and better about it. And then when I actually discovered that there was actually yoga class, not many, but there were some yoga classes available in Melbourne, and I started to go to yoga classes and just feeling a part of something that was positive, and also having this idea that there was something more to it than just the physical, that things started to change in my body. And for me, starting to study the philosophy as well was very important to me, to understand that we're on this journey. It's not about being perfect, but as we try to do our best, say with the postures, as we try to do our best at a posture, we start to feel those benefits. And I guess a lot early in the stages, I discovered that if I'm actually doing my best, in its own way, it's perfect, whatever it is on that day. Mm-hmm. And through the physical postures, what we do is we start to release pent-up trauma that might be there, emotional history. And yeah, so at times my students as well, they'll start to have emotional release in the postures. So I experienced it, and I guide my students through that process as well. And I could speak a lot more about that. I think it's a really positive process.
Yeah. So definitely, I mean, what have been your experiences with other people now that you're teaching teachers, but you've taught hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of classes, and you've made many connections. So what have been, some standout stories or transformations that you've seen within your practice and your world now?
So I'll make a couple of broad observations. And we know from the yoga philosophy that one of the very first principles is ahimsa, non-violence. And then another one of the principles of yoga is aparigraha, which sort of translates as non-hoarding, non-greed. And what I've noticed is that people who start to do yoga on a regular basis become more caring and become more sharing, even without being aware of these principles of ahimsa and aparigraha, the yoga philosophy. People just naturally become more caring and sharing. And Byron Yoga Centre has developed a mission statement to have yoga practiced in every town and village. That's our mission statement, have yoga practiced in every town and village. And because I've had that observation of people who practice yoga regularly become more caring and sharing, that there's a thing called the tipping point, where you get 1% of a population group doing something differently, then it influences the rest of the population group. They say when you talk about a nation, it could be as low as 0.1% or globally 0.01%. So Byron Yoga Centre has a vision that when we get enough people practicing yoga regularly, this could bring an end to global warfare and global famine. So it's really nice to feel a part of that vision, that mission statement. Mm-hmm. In fact, our logo, I don't know if you can see my shirt here with the circles. It's about the benefits of yoga rippling out.
Okay.
Yeah, that inevitably, Gandhi, for example, a great yogi. There's not a lot of stories about his yoga postures, but he said one of his famous sayings was, "Be the change that you want to see in the world."
Yeah.
And what I find is that as people practice yoga regularly, their life changes for the positive, and that influences the people around them.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's such an amazing mission statement, John, and yeah, I too would be really privileged to be a part of that, and I suppose in a way that I am if I'm working with the children that I'm working with. So
definitely.
Yeah, and you do. I mean, I feel very grateful and joyful to be a part of this process with them. So as you know, I work with a lot of trauma. So it can be medical trauma, it can be physical trauma, it can be neglect. So very much the psychological trauma and physical trauma. So have you had any experiences in that realm with your clients, with the people that you work with? Have you experienced anything transformational within your yoga practice?
Yes, I haven't had the blessing like you have to work with children, but with adults, I work a lot with adults that suffer from post-traumatic stress, particularly in the area of first responders and the military.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I don't know if you can see this. Is that shot very well?
Ah, yeah.
I'll just give them a little bit of a plug because I'm a supporter of the group Frontline Yoga, which is all about helping those first responders and people from the military that are suffering from that post-traumatic stress of, you know, you can only imagine the type of things that they've been through. And so I work a lot with veterans. We even have a program now to help train veterans to become yoga teachers so that they can go out and help their fellow veterans. So what I've seen for people that, you know, veterans, for example, that are suffering from that post-traumatic stress but not able to deal with it, feeling that they're inadequate because they're suffering from it. And yet, so I help them to develop self-acceptance, and through self-acceptance, they can start to make those positive changes, let go of that trauma that's being held in their body, and start to develop self-confidence and start to, and then this yoga, the spiritual principle of yoga, that we keep what we have by giving it away. So there's nothing better than when we start to feel the benefits of yoga to then share it with other people.
Sure. Okay. It then becomes a really wonderful ripple effect.
Yes. I also have a theory. It's a hard one to really prove, but I believe that when we hold trauma into our body, and it happens as early as, well, I think it's quite common when children go through puberty, they start to have traumatic things happen in life. Like I can remember, for example, sharing a secret with a friend, and then my friend telling the rest of the class, and the whole class teasing me. And so upset that I wanted to cry, but I knew if I cried, I'd get teased even more. So I suppressed it, I pushed it down, and then subconsciously thinking, I'll deal with it later. But instead of dealing with it later, I'd have another event happen, like perhaps, you know, my first girlfriend rejecting me, and feeling all that sadness, grief, rejection, and pushing it down. And I believe these emotions of grief and loss, rejection, when we push them down, they land around the hips and groin area. So getting tighter and tighter through that whole lower abdomen, groin area. And if we don't deal with it in some positive way, I believe it will express itself sideways through something like possibly arthritis or cancer or some chronic illness. So in yoga practice, when we're doing the yoga postures, especially when we start working around the hips area, we start to release that that historic grief and other so-called negative emotions, and we may at time actually experience those emotions. We might not remember the event that precipitated it, but we might start to feel that grief, and we might even start to burst into tears. But I believe it's positive. It's a really positive way of dealing with those past events.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I have found is that we don't necessarily need to know why we're feeling these horrible feelings. You know, when I was just last year, I was experiencing panic and anxiety attacks, and you know, I still don't know why. It's never been something I've experienced in my life. However, I just don't think that's important for me. When I turned to yoga and meditation on a daily basis, that was my commitment. then those feelings went away. And so I think what you've explained, you know, rings true for me also, that I didn't need to find out why I was feeling that way, you know, just to get comfortable with it in my body and begin to feel safe again within my body. That's really what yoga and meditation helped me to do during that period. So, you know, that's what a lot of people that have experienced trauma need to do again. They need to feel safe again in their body, and become comfortable with the uncomfortable for a certain period of time, I believe.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. And that's been my personal experience, and it's been my experience of students that I've worked with as well. They don't have to remember and analyze those past events, but to accept and let it go and move on.
Yeah, so I guess for parents or carers or even adults that are watching, John, but mainly, you know, I work with the parents. If they're caring for children and they have children with special needs, because there's a lot of sensory stuff and still a lot of that creates a lot of anxiety within the body. But any trauma, and they're considering yoga or meditation, but it's a bit of a foreign concept for them possibly, or they might be a bit scared to try it and they don't want to ignore all of the medical model suggestions. What advice would you give them if they are considering yoga as a form of therapy or complementary therapy?
Well, I have a few simple guidelines, and three of those is that in our yoga practice, it's really important that we don't do anything that we don't feel like doing. So really important to not try to force the children to be doing postures or a length of practice that they aren't comfortable with at that time. The second one is, don't worry if you get confused, because all these new movements and new ideas can be very confusing. So don't do anything that doesn't feel right. Don't worry if you get confused. But the third guideline is more important than the first two combined, and that is that yoga should be joyfully performed. So as much as we can, to make it fun, to really enjoy. We don't have to do things perfectly, but just have fun in attempting it. So I think those three guidelines are really important. And then to help to get the most from it, I call it the 3 Ps: practice, patience, perseverance. So as much as we can, the carers and parents to encourage and create the opportunity to do a regular practice. Ideally, as you say, daily. In fact, I sometimes say, ideally, move every muscle and every joint in every direction every day. So practice, be patient. Quite often when we first start doing yoga, the changes can be very big at first, but then the changes start to taper off. So be patient. Sometimes we just have to trust that it's still working, even though we don't notice a big difference from one day to another. And keep persevering, even when we don't really feel like it, to do something, even if it's just a small practice.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Thanks for that, John. And is there, we'll wrap up, but is there anything else that you wish to share or give insight to, or anything else that you want to say to any parents or carers out there that, might be considering it, or any other points that you wish to make about yoga or the benefits or anything that we've missed?
No, I guess I would just like to emphasize that yoga is a lot more than just the postures. And in some ways, the postures are like the tip of the iceberg, which is less than 1/10 of an iceberg, but 9/10 of that iceberg is sitting below the surface. So yoga offers a lot more than just the postures. So learning to do more correct breathing, starting to learn to understand our mind and try to bring some quietness to that mind, that busy mind that we all have.
Yes.
And to look at some of the very simple philosophical principles that yoga has. So that's, as I mentioned earlier, Purna yoga is about bringing those 4 pillars together: the postures, the asanas, the correct breathing, the pranayama, starting to quieten the mind, some meditation, and starting to look at some of the basic ideas, that the philosophy that yoga can offer.
Yeah.
So.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate your time today, sharing all of your wisdom and your story as well. And so John is at Byron Yoga Centre, and if you have any questions or you're interested in his teaching, then by all means contact him through that website. John, is that the best way to get in contact with you?
Yes, for sure. We have quite a large staff, and everyone here believes in what they're doing. And as a group, we'd be very happy to give any help or advice to anyone that would like to know more about yoga. So through our website, there's an email contact there, and people can also subscribe to our newsletter, which gives some great ideas about yoga and some fantastic recipes as well.
Okay, great. All right, thanks, John. And if you do have children between the ages of 4 and 18, and they are having difficulties at the moment, they've experienced quite traumatic events, they suffer from severe anxiety, you feel like they're really disconnected or fearful in their bodies, then by all means you can head to kidsyogatherapy.com.au or comment on this video. You can give me a call. All my details are on the website, and we can have it's a free chat, and we'll just discuss the needs of your child and if kids yoga therapy programs are for you. I'd be more than happy to have those conversations with you. So thanks for joining us, and yeah, thanks, John. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, John.